Arguably one of the most important things to understand in relation to successful fruit and vegetable growing is your soil, knowing whether or not it might be acidic or alkaline, and also what type of vegetables like those types of soils. So there may be occasions where we need to add nutrients into the soil to supplement the ground ready to grow certain types of vegetables, but that can be expensive if we have to buy these products from a garden centre, DIY store, or even online. So in this video I'm going to show you 5 ways in which you can add nutrients into the ground completely free to provide those extra nutrients for your vegetables. So if you do like the video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, then don't forget to press the subscribe button. So in order to grow our fruit and vegetables successfully, the first thing we need to do is find out what type of soil do they actually like, and also what type of soil do we have. Now, to find out what type of soil we have to do a test on the soil, something called a pH test, and that's a term you're going to hear a lot in this video. And pH is a measure of the alkalinity or the acidity of the soil. The pH scale goes from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral right in the middle. So anything above 7 is alkaline and everything below 7 is acidic. So the lower the number, the more acidic the soil, and the higher the number, the more alkaline it is. So if we have to make amendments to the soil, if we work out what our pH is, we can know what additives to add to bring it to the pH that would be optimum for those type of vegetables. Now, most vegetables like a pH of close to neutral. 6.5, which is very slightly acidic, to 7 is ideal for most vegetables, but some vegetables such as the brassica family, that is your cabbages, your Brussels sprouts, your cauliflowers, those types of vegetables, they like something a little bit more alkaline. So if we know that, then we can adjust our soil to adding nutrients to ensure that we get the right balance of nutrients for that particular type of vegetable. If you are going to carry out a pH test for your soil, there are lots of products on the market, and fairly cost-effective products, to allow you to do a pH test on your soil. So if you are going to do that in various parts of your allotment or garden, not just in one position, because the pH value can vary even in a very small area. But to do a pH test, what you normally do is take a sample of your soil, put it in water, mix it around, and then you can either use litmus paper, which will change colour, or there are a lot of pH meters that you can put into the water to find out what the pH value of your soil is. If you are going to use water, make sure you use distilled water, not tap water. The problem with tap water, it has a varied pH between 6.5 and 8.5, and it can affect the results. But distilled water is pure water with a neutral pH value of 7. If, like me, you're lucky enough to have a log burner or another means of burning wood, or maybe you know somebody who burns wood, then you have access to free wood ash. Now, the wood ash is a really good addition to the soil for growing your vegetables, because the wood ash contains potassium or potash, which is one of the main macronutrients necessary for healthy plant growth. And potassium is important within a plant because it helps to manage or regulate the water within the plant, and that helps transport foods and starches through the plant from the roots to the stem to the leaves to help the plant develop healthily. So for vegetables, good source of potassium is really, really important, and having access to free wood ash is a means of providing that for free where you need to. But a few notes of caution before we start. You've got to bear in mind that with a wood burner like this, it is possible to burn other types of wood which are not recommended, such as laminates or even ones that have been treated with preservatives. But when they're burned, any chemicals in them will go into the ash itself, and if then you start using that on your garden, in your compost heap or wherever you use it, you're also going to add the chemicals. So always be cautious about wood ash to make sure that you're clear on the source of the wood, that it hasn't got any contaminants in it, because you could end up doing more damage than good. But pure wood ash from tree branches and trunks is really what you want to be looking for. So a good thing to add your wood ash to is your compost heap. But because, remember, it contains potassium, which is alkaline, you don't want to add too much too soon. Otherwise you could end up raising the pH within the compost too high and therefore make it too alkaline, and that will affect the balance of the decomposition. So you want to just add it sparingly in thin layers rather than lots and lots of it. Now, because wood ash contains potassium and therefore is alkaline, then you could possibly think about utilising it instead of lime. So where you might add lime or you're planting certain vegetables, you might think about putting a thin sprinkling of wood ash on top. And if you're going to do that, there's a number of things you need to be careful of. Firstly, check the pH of your soil first, because if your soil is already alkaline, adding more wood ash is just going to increase the alkalinity and you could make it too alkaline. So always check the pH of your soil first. And the other thing as well is that if you buy lime from a store or online, you know it's a pure product, but you can't confidently know exactly what's in this unless you know what's been burnt. Don't use any wood ash that is damp or even wet, because the potassium in the wood ash is highly soluble. So if it's already wet or completely saturated, all you're going to end up really is an ineffective sludge or mush that's going to have no effect whatsoever. So always make sure that wood ash that you use and sprinkle on your garden is completely dry. One final thing to be aware of as well: avoid using wood ash on an area where you're planning to grow potatoes the following spring, because the high alkalinity can encourage potato scab. But besides that, the potassium in the wood ash has loads of benefits for your compost, for your vegetables, if you're using it in the right way. Now, coffee is a really popular drink, and if you go down a high street or go to a shopping centre or a shopping mall, it won't take you long before you come across a coffee shop, all of them producing coffee, and the excess waste that they have from that is these coffee grounds. And if you go to a coffee shop, I'm sure you'll be able to find a local coffee shop, if you ask them, that will happily give you the coffee grounds, because they are a waste material. Now, coffee grounds are a really good additive to various parts of your fruit and vegetable garden, onto your compost heap, and have lots of good nitrogen inside them that can have lots of benefits for your fruit and vegetables. Now, there is a bit of a myth that coffee grounds are acidic. Coffee itself is slightly acidic, but that acid is lost when the coffee is percolated and drank. What's left behind is effectively a material that is pH neutral, around about pH 7. If it is acidic, it's going to be something in the region of 6.5 as a maximum. So it's a good additive to add to your vegetable garden. If you are going to add this to your vegetable garden, you won't get that initial rush of nitrogen that you might immediately think. Coffee grounds have a slow release of nitrogen, so if you put this onto your soil in thin layers, it will take time for the microorganisms to break it down and also to release that nitrogen. So you will get the nitrogen eventually, but it will take a little bit of time. The good news about coffee grounds is they also contain trace elements. So not only do they contain nitrogen, you'll also get phosphorus, magnesium, copper, and other nutrients that will be useful for your soil. Now, to use them, they can be used as an additive to your compost heap. Don't add more than about 15% by volume onto your compost heap, because you want the other ingredients of the compost to help with the decomposition process, and lay it in thin layers. You may spread them thinly around your plants and vegetables as a mulch, but don't make it too thick, because if they get wet quickly they can become quite lumpy. And also you could possibly think about using or adding water and use them as a liquid fertilizer. So coffee grounds as a free resource provide lots of potential benefits in your fruit and vegetable garden. Now, I would say the use of grass cuttings is one of the most underused resources we have available in the fruit and vegetable garden. When we cut our grass, we often get a decent amount of grass clippings, and the obvious place that people use them is on compost heaps, and that's fantastic because they contain nitrogen and they mix with the carbons, the browns and other materials that you put into the compost heap, and they will decompose and break down, so they are good for a compost heap. But also, because of the amount of nitrogen they have in them, they're also useful for mulches, which is putting them around plants and vegetables while they're growing. That does a number of different things. Firstly, it helps to keep the root zone cooler. It helps to retain moisture around the plant, and also it helps to block out light, which helps to suppress weeds. Because it's grass and it will eventually decompose, so grass clippings are an excellent way of adding nutrients to your ground via the nitrogen, also trace elements of potassium and other nutrients as well, and also using them for your compost heaps. If you are going to use grass clippings around your fruits and veg form mulches, then try to ensure that the grass you cut, there is not lots of weeds in it, because what you don't want to do is cut up the weed seeds that are in the grass and then start putting them around your plants, because clearly then you're going to have a more of a problem with weeds. Another fantastic and free resource for the vegetable and fruit grower are leaves. And at this time of year, in autumn or fall, if you're in the United States, deciduous trees will start to shed their leaves, and that gives us lots of opportunities to utilise these for various uses. Leaves contain high levels of carbon, and that's needed for composting, so we'll look at that in a moment in how we would utilise leaves in a compost heap. But you can make something with just the leaves themselves called leaf mould. Leaf mould is useful in different ways. It doesn't do the same thing as compost, but it does act as a soil improver so that you can add it to soil once it's decomposed, and it will help things like the drainage of the soil, the consistency of the soil, and it will help invite microorganisms into the soil to improve the ecosystem. So there's lots of benefits to using leaf mould. There is a video on my channel showing you how I made leaf mould and the process involved and what you need to do and what the benefits are. So do check that out in your own time. So leaves are a fantastic available resource that you can just collect. So my advice is collect as many leaves as you can and store them, because they're a fantastic resource in the vegetable and fruit garden. You might ask yourself, can I dig leaves straight into the ground? Well, that's not the best idea, because in order for the leaves to break down, they'll need nitrogen, and if you put them in ground where you're growing fruit and vegetables, they'll start to compete with the nitrogen that's needed for those fruit and vegetables as well. So I wouldn't advise that you dig leaves straight into the ground. Let them decompose first as leaf mould, and then you can utilise them as a soil improver, as previously mentioned. Now, if you let the leaves fully decompose, and that will depend on what you do with them when you're preparing them. So if you were to cut them to smaller pieces, they would clearly decompose quicker. If you were just to leave them as leaves and then just let them decompose on their own, they might take around about 2 years to fully decompose, but you will get a compost-like consistency mixture at the end of it. And again, another use of that is you could mix it with your general compost for your plants and seedlings in the future once it's decomposed properly. So that could save you money as well. So there's lots of potential uses and benefits to leaves. So if you see leaves lying around, or you see maybe your neighbours are picking up leaves and throwing them away, why not go and rescue them and see if you can use them yourself. And finally, in a video like this where I'm talking about free resources, it'll be impossible not to talk about compost, your homemade compost. It is the most environmentally friendly way of dealing with your kitchen waste, of making the most of all the waste that you'll have in your allotment and garden, and most things you can actually put on the compost heap and it just naturally decomposes. So it's almost nonsensical not to make your own compost. There is a video on my channel which I'll put a link up for, which shows you how to make compost and the difference between the greens and the browns, the nitrogens and the carbons and the mixes. So there is a little bit of know-how involved, but really just a case of, you know, making sure that all the waste from your allotment or your garden is just collected and mixed. Occasionally you'll need to turn it just to put a bit of air in it, but nowadays as well, with the way that the price of compost is increasing, and it will continue to increase as we look at alternatives to peat-free compost, you have the ability to make your own compost. And I made compost for the first time last year, and there's a video on my channel showing you how I used it, and I was so pleased with that. So a little bit of know-how and using just free waste that you put somewhere else into a compost heap, mixing all of those ingredients together and letting it decompose in its own way, and then depends on how quickly the decomposition process takes, but I've used compost after 12 months of starting my first heap. Well, hopefully that's given you 1 or 2 ideas about what you can use for free to help add nutrients to your soil for your fruit and veg. Hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you some things to think about. If you're using things that I've not already covered, then please make sure you put them in the comments below so others can share them. I will be creating a video in the future looking at other ways of creating free nutrients, such as eggshells, banana peel, horse manure, and any other things that I also come across. I'll let you know. So look out for that video in the future. But if you do like this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, then don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.